Nia was a girl of quiet strength, the kind of child whose eyes seemed to hold more words than her lips ever uttered. She lived in the village of Mbutu, nestled between two rivers and watched over by hills that told stories when the wind howled. The villagers often said Nia's voice was made of honey and thunder, sweet when she laughed, fierce when she spoke the truth. She had learned storytelling at her mother's knee, a gentle woman named Lela who had a laugh like birdsong and a spine made of iron. Lela had raised Nia with warmth, wisdom, and the belief that a woman's voice was a gift from the gods. But not everyone in the household believed that. Baraka, Lela's husband and Nia's stepfather, was a man carved from stone and shadow. His face bore the hard lines of someone who had lived for control, who believed that respect came through fear and silence. To him, a woman's voice was a challenge, and a girl who questioned, who imagined, who dreamed out loud, that was a threat. He had tolerated Lela's strength only because she was beloved by the villagers, her spirit a shield around Nia. But when Lela fell ill one evening and never rose again, Baraka saw his chance. The mourning period was short in the house. Before the last ember of the funeral pyre dimmed, Baraka had declared that he was now the sole head of the family. The kindness Nia had known vanished like smoke. No more stories before bed, no more singing in the morning light, no more humming while grinding millet. Baraka hated the sound of her voice. He demanded silence in the name of discipline. But silence, for Nia, was death. At first, she tried to stay quiet. She bit her tongue when she wanted to speak. She swallowed her songs like stones. But her spirit clawed at her from the inside, desperate to break free. So she sang in the fields when she thought no one was listening. She whispered old stories to the children of the village, passing on her mother's legacy. She spoke up during community gatherings when Baraka lied, calling out injustice with words sharp and clear. The villagers started listening. They saw in Nia a spark of her mother, a fire that refused to dim. And that made Baraka furious. "You think because your mother spoke, you can speak too," he barked one night, slamming his fist on the table, splintering the wood like it was nothing. "A girl's voice is a serpent, it charms and bites. You will keep it caged." But Nia did not. Could not. It wasn't long before Baraka's anger turned into cruelty. He started locking her in the hut for days, withholding food, forcing her to kneel for hours in the yard under the sun. But Nia's eyes never lowered, and her silence, when she chose it, was not submission. It was defiance. When she did speak, it was with purpose. Her voice, though soft, carried weight. It was truth wrapped in rhythm, pain masked in parables. She could bring a grown man to stillness with a single tale. And that terrified Baraka more than any blade. He began to see her as a curse, a mouth possessed by spirits meant to ruin him. Whispers started to spread, villagers repeating things Nia had said, truths about Baraka's treatment of her, his harsh punishments, his growing madness. He accused her of turning the village against him. "You think your voice is power," he growled one stormy evening, his shadow looming in the candlelight. "I'll take it from you. Then we'll see if your silence is still so brave." That night, while the rain hammered the thatched roof and lightning painted the walls in flashes of white, Baraka dragged Nia from her mat. She kicked and screamed, but he was too strong. He tied her arms, pinned her down on the floor, and held her face in his hand like a hunter gripping prey. His eyes were wild, like a man possessed by something older than anger. "You should have obeyed," he hissed, lifting the knife. Nia's screams filled the room. Then, nothing. Only blood and silence. He didn't even wait for her to stop trembling. He threw a cloth over her mouth to stifle the bleeding and dragged her out into the forest. No prayers. No final words. He believed she would bleed out, or be taken by wild beasts before morning. The girl with the serpent's voice would be gone. Forgotten. A lesson in silence. He left her by the roots of an old baobab tree, half conscious, her tongue severed, her body broken. As he walked away, the thunder swallowed his steps, and the forest closed around her like a mouth. But what Baraka didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that the silence he had forced on her would not be her end. It would be her beginning. The night was thick with rain and the scent of wet earth as Nia crawled through the underbrush, her mouth stuffed with a filthy cloth now soaked in blood. Her tongue was gone, and with it, the world she had known, her voice, her rebellion, her very name spoken aloud. The pain was unbearable, a fire that licked her throat and burned through her jaw, but she refused to die there. She would not let Baraka's darkness be the final chapter of her story. Each movement sent shockwaves of agony through her body, but she pushed forward, dragging herself deeper into the unknown. The baobab tree faded behind her, swallowed by shadows and wind, and ahead loomed the edge of the forest of echoes. It was a place whispered about in children's stories, feared by the elders, marked on no maps. They said those who entered either never returned or came back changed, haunted, blessed, or cursed. No one truly knew which. The trees at the forest's edge stood like towering sentinels, thick and gnarled, their branches twisting together like clasped hands in mourning. Nia, barely conscious, slipped between their roots and vanished into the green dark. The forest greeted her not with hostility, but with murmurs, soft, almost musical sighs that rustled through the leaves. It was as though the trees spoke to one another in a language older than time, one meant only for those who had suffered in silence. And Nia, bleeding, broken, and wordless, understood. She passed out under a canopy of vines and moonlight, her breath shallow, the pain cradling her like a cruel lullaby. When she awoke, she was warm. Blanketed in woven grass and leaves, her wounds cleaned and wrapped with herbs that gave off a bitter, earthen smell. A fire crackled nearby, and beside it sat a figure, old, bent, and still as stone. The woman's eyes were white as chalk, blind but burning with something deeper than sight. "You're awake," she said softly, her voice hoarse yet kind. "Good. The forest told me you were coming." Nia tried to speak, but only air escaped her lips. Her throat convulsed with the effort, her eyes filling with rage and helplessness. She reached for her mouth, to gesture, to scream silently. The woman moved to her side, touching her gently. "Shoo," she whispered. "You do not need your tongue here. In this forest, we speak with more than words." Her name was Wanja, and she lived alone in the heart of the forest of echoes, among trees that held secrets and shadows that remembered. She listened to the cries of the voiceless, dreams of the forgotten, and the echoes of those silenced too soon. The forest had been her home for decades, perhaps longer, no one could say. She was not a witch, though the villagers feared she might be. She was a keeper, a healer, and a teacher of lost languages. For days, Wanja nursed Nia's body and taught her new ways to speak. With her hands, she traced symbols in the dirt. With her feet, she stomped rhythms into the ground. With a hollow drum, she taught Nia to beat messages into the night. Each sound was a sentence, each pattern a paragraph. Nia's silence became a canvas. Her grief became ink. She learned that sound could be shaped, not by tongue or teeth, but by will and intent. She learned that emotion could be felt through vibrations. That even the earth listens if one strikes it the right way. And through it all, the forest whispered. It whispered in the rustling leaves, in the hum of crickets, in the low groans of trees shifting under moonlight. The spirits of those wronged long ago lived here, their voices trapped between bark and breeze. Some were women like her, whose tongues were stolen or whose truths were silenced by violence. Others were children who never grew up, lovers buried in shame, warriors accused of crimes they didn't commit. The more time Nia spent under the forest's watchful gaze, the more she began to change. Her nightmares turned vivid, visions of fire, of serpents with human faces, of Baraka screaming as smoke poured from his mouth. Her waking hours were filled with strange sensations, the pull of the earth beneath her feet, the heat that gathered in her palms when she struck the drum, the way flames seemed to bend toward her during evening rituals. Wanja noticed. "The forest has chosen you," she said one night, as they sat by the fire. "It hears your silence and remembers it. The pain you carry, it is fertile ground. From it, power grows." Nia stared at her, unsure what to feel. She was no witch. No warrior. Just a girl who had loved her mother, who had dared to speak, and who had paid dearly for it. But something stirred inside her, darker than grief, deeper than rage. She could no longer cry, but her eyes burned. Her fists trembled, and when she placed them on the ground, the earth shivered. The drum pulsed under her fingers like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She wasn't just learning a new language. She was becoming it. Wanja began teaching her the forest's ancient lore, tales of the silenced flame, a spirit said to awaken in women who had been wronged beyond repair. These women did not speak. They burned. They returned from the brink not with revenge, but with reckoning. Their silence was not submission, it was the calm before the storm. At night, Wanja would chant beside her, guiding her into trances where Nia saw visions. A woman surrounded by fire but unburnt. A serpent wrapping around a village elder's throat. A tree split in two, one half dead, the other green with life. These were not dreams. They were memories of the forest. Warnings. Prophecies. And still, the forest whispered. It whispered to her in ways she couldn't explain. In the rustling grass, in the way the wind wrapped around her wrist like a lover's hand. In the shadows that seemed to bend when she walked past. Nia no longer needed a voice. The forest had become her voice. And it would speak, through fire, through fear, and through fury. The moon was blood-red the night Wanja led Nia to the sacred clearing. The air crackled with an unseen tension, and even the animals fell silent, their instinct guiding them to stillness. The trees leaned in as if listening, their branches trembling with 1,000 unheard voices. Nia, now steady on her feet and stronger than she'd ever been, stood barefoot on the mossy earth, her eyes fixed on the center of the circle marked with ashes and bones. Wanja approached her slowly, carrying a bowl filled with dark liquid, sap from the oldest tree in the forest of echoes, mixed with the crushed embers of ancestral fires. With her free hand, she drew a curved knife from her belt, its blade made from obsidian and wrapped in red thread. "This is the ritual of transformation," Wanja said, her voice low, reverent. "The fire that lives in you must be named, must be awakened, or it will consume you." Nia nodded. She no longer had words, but her silence spoke volumes. Her body stood unshaken. Her eyes burned with something deeper than anger, something ancient. Wanja took the blade and sliced a small line across Nia's palm. Blood welled up, bright and vibrant against her brown skin. Without flinching, Nia held it over the bowl, letting her blood mix with the sacred sap and ash. The moment her blood touched the mixture, the bowl shuddered, and the fire in the circle burst to life, flames dancing higher than a man's head. The clearing lit up with orange and gold, flickering shadows painting Nia's face as she stepped into the circle. But the fire did not burn her. It curled around her skin like a lover's touch, whispering secrets and heat. Her breath quickened. The pain in her body faded, replaced by a powerful warmth that surged from her core to her fingertips. The fire welcomed her. The flames pulsed with her heartbeat. They shifted when she raised her hands. And when she cried silently, the fire wept too, spitting sparks into the sky. It was alive, tethered to her grief, to her pain, to her story. Wanja began chanting in the old tongue, a song older than the village, older even than the trees. The spirits responded. Their whispers grew louder, threading through the leaves like wind laced with memory. They told her stories, of others like her, women silenced and discarded, who had returned as legends. They warned her, revenge will feed the fire, but only truth will keep it tame. Let hatred lead, and you will burn with it. But Nia already understood. The fire in her was not for chaos. It was not blind destruction. It was voice. It was justice. Over the next few weeks, Wanja taught Nia to command the flames, not with words, but with intent. With breath and focus and raw emotion. She learned to spark fires with a single strike of her palm, to form shapes in the smoke, to send silent messages through flickering signals visible from miles away. In the charred trunks of dead trees, Nia began to carve symbols, marks that told stories. Her own. Others. A curved line for betrayal. A broken circle for loss. An upward flame for truth that refused to die. These became her language, her new voice etched into wood, into stone, into memory. And soon, the whispers began to travel. hunters spoke of seeing fire flare in places no one had touched. A merchant claimed he saw a girl with flames trailing behind her, her eyes bright with otherworldly fire. A child returned from the woods with a carved stone, marked with a symbol that made the elder women gasp and clutch their chests. They called her the Ghost Girl. The Fireborn. The one who speaks in silence and walks with spirits. The village, once secure in its power and order, began to murmur with fear and curiosity. But none dared speak her name aloud. They thought she had died in the wild, devoured by hyenas or drowned in a river. But now they weren't so sure. And Baraka rose like a serpent coiled in a crown. With Nia gone and no one to speak against him, he played the role of grieving father. He told stories of how she had gone mad after her mother's death, how she had run into the forest and never returned. He shed false tears at gatherings and made offerings to the gods in her memory. The villagers, too afraid or too apathetic to question him, believed the tale. But beneath the surface, Baraka had changed. He ruled with fear cloaked in tradition. He whispered into the ears of the elders, bribed the warriors, and silenced the women who remembered too much. He banned songs and stories that celebrated rebellion. He outlawed gatherings of women at night. He built his house larger, higher, as if to stand above the truth itself. But Baraka could feel it, something watching. The fire in his hearth crackled too loudly when he spoke lies. The shadows on his wall danced when no one moved. He began to dream of Nia, standing silent at the edge of the forest, her eyes glowing, her mouth stitched with flames. And in the dreams, she never chased him. She simply stared, and he burned. Back in the forest, Nia watched the smoke rise from the village in the distance. Each curl of ash, each trail of soot, told her that her time was nearing. The fire inside her had grown strong, but not wild. She had shaped it like a blacksmith tempers steel, with patience, with pain, and with purpose. She was no longer a girl cast aside. She was a voice made of fire. And they were starting to hear her. At the edge of the village where the trees grew thick and shadows lingered longer than they should, a strange symbol burned into a baobab's bark. It hadn't been there the day before. It glowed faintly in the night, even as the fire that had carved it turned to ember. A twisting flame, an eye inside its center, and beneath it, a downward stroke that pointed toward the village. The elders were the first to see it, and they muttered nervously as they circled the tree, arguing over its meaning. Some said it was a sign from the ancestors. Others said it was a warning. But an old woman, who still remembered Nia's songs and how they had unsettled Baraka, whispered what many feared to say aloud: "She has come back. The Fire Girl. The Silent One." By morning, 3 more trees bore the same mark. One near the river. One on the path to the shrine. And the last outside the hut of the village gossip who had helped spread the lie of Nia's madness. She found the symbol just before dawn and ran screaming into the center of the village. Fear cracked open the calm of everyday life. Fires were no longer comfort. Children were kept indoors after dark. The very wind seemed to carry whispers, soft at first, like rustling leaves, but sharper when one listened closely. The name Nia hummed in the air like a forgotten prayer returning with purpose. Baraka, sitting on his elevated stool like a king among mortals, was the first to break. "She is dead," he told the elders, pounding his staff into the earth. "I saw her die. I fed her to the forest. These are tricks, illusions meant to weaken us." But his voice lacked the strength it once carried. He had not slept in days. Shadows rimmed his eyes, and his hands shook when he held his staff too tightly. At night, he heard soft footsteps near his hut, followed by a hiss of fire and the fading scent of burnt wood. He claimed it was nothing. But when his prized hunting spear cracked in two for no reason, and the meat he had preserved spoiled overnight, he began to panic. He gathered warriors and declared the village cursed. "This is witchcraft," he said, his eyes wild. "We must purify this place. Drive out the spirits." Ao, who had once gathered herbs for Nia's mother and shared roasted yams with Nia beneath the fig tree, had grown into a quiet young man with gentle hands and curious eyes. When he heard of the symbols, his heart stirred with something more than fear. He went to the baobab and studied the mark. Something about it called to him. Not just the shape but the way it curved, the intentionality behind it. He remembered Nia's carvings on the wood in her mother's hut, small etchings that told stories. He remembered her humming when she was deep in thought. Her words always carried fire, even before she was silenced. This wasn't witchcraft, he thought. It was a message. He started collecting the sightings. He traced a pattern. The symbols pointed toward the places where Nia had once sung, once told stories, once been heard. They were not random, they were memories etched in flame. That night, Ao climbed the old watchtower and scanned the tree line beyond the fields. He saw nothing but darkness. But he felt her watching. Baraka, meanwhile, doubled down on his paranoia. He called for rituals. He paid the shaman to smear ash over every hut. He banned any talk of Nia. Anyone caught speaking of her would be punished. He commanded a witch hunt, any who sympathize with spirits, any who speak to the trees or keep fire burning past nightfall, bring them to me. Women were dragged from their homes. An old herbalist was beaten. Even the children weren't spared from suspicion. The village turned tense and quiet, held hostage by a fear too old to name. But Nia did not stop. She crept along the edge of her old home, cloaked by the forest's shadows. Her scars no longer throbbed. Her silence no longer hurt. She watched the ones who had lied, who had remained silent as she bled. She left symbols outside their homes, not all, just the ones who had helped Baraka. The ones who had feasted while she starved. And then one night, something changed. A scream split the air. A woman named Bebe, the same one who had stood by while Baraka spun lies of Nia's madness, was gone. Her hut, a short walk from the central fire, stood smoking. No bodies were found. Just ashes. And carved into the burnt doorpost, the largest symbol yet. A flame with wings. An eye above it. And a broken chain below. The elders convened in terror. "This spirit does not forgive," one whispered. "This is no ordinary haunting." Baraka's fury erupted. "She wants to destroy us all," he shouted. "Then let her come. I will burn the whole forest if I must." But as he shouted, his voice cracked. Because deep inside, he knew. He had not killed Nia. She had survived. And now she had become something they could not control, something shaped by pain, born of fire, and fueled by every lie they had told. Ao stood alone near the remnants of Bebe's hut, staring at the mark on the scorched doorframe. He reached out and touched the wood, the heat still faint beneath his fingers. "Nia," he whispered. And in the flickering flames of the dying fire, the symbol pulsed, once, like a heartbeat. She had heard him. Under a moonless sky, Ao ventured deeper into the edge of the forest where the earth grew warm beneath the soles of his feet. The trees whispered, leaves rustling as if breathing secrets. He walked toward the baobab with the first flame mark, his heart thudding, not from fear, but from hope that had grown too heavy to carry alone. He stood still and whispered again, "Nia, if you're there." Behind him, fire sparked. He turned. She stood cloaked in shadow and ember, her eyes glowing with the reflection of the flickering flame that hovered above her open palm. Her body was draped in earth-woven cloths, her feet bare, her face lined not by time but by trial. No tongue moved in her mouth, but her presence spoke. Her silence was deafening, like thunder waiting to strike. Ao didn't flinch. "It's really you," he said softly. She stepped closer. With trembling hands, she reached into the small satchel across her chest and pulled out a flat stone. Upon it, etched in fire-hardened grooves, was a simple drawing, two children beneath a fig tree. One offered the other a yam. She pointed at Ao, then at the image. He choked back a laugh, then a sob. "That was our secret place," he whispered. "You used to say that yam was sweeter because we shared it in silence. You remember." Nia nodded. Ao dropped to one knee and bowed his head. "You don't have to be alone anymore." In the days that followed, Nia chose a few villagers to trust. Old Mara, the midwife who had helped her mother. Young Tano, whose father had vanished during Baraka's rise. And Naya, a girl no older than 12 who had once left bread at the forest's edge, believing the fire spirit was lonely. With Ao as her voice, Nia began to spread her stories. But not with words. At night, they carved glowing symbols in the dust of the marketplace, images that told of a girl silenced, of a mother's love, of a brutal man who feared truth. Children woke to the pictures and copied them onto stones, trees, even the walls of their homes. They didn't understand all the meanings, but they understood that someone was speaking. And they listened. The images grew more detailed, a mother with stars in her eyes, a girl crying as a knife approached, a flame blooming from her chest. The villagers whispered. Some were afraid. But more began to question. Was Baraka's tale of Nia's madness a lie? Why had they believed her silence was deserved? One by one, memories returned to those who had forgotten, Nia's stories at the well, her songs that soothed wailing babies, the courage in her gaze even when her voice trembled. Baraka, however, was unraveling. He ordered the destruction of every symbol. Erase them, he shouted. Stone the children who draw them if you must. The people hesitated. When a boy named Dogo was whipped for copying a flame symbol on his school slate, mothers screamed. They began hiding the drawings in baskets, under mats, etched faintly into doorframes. The more Baraka tried to erase Nia, the brighter her message burned. She never attacked directly. She didn't need to. Her stories spread like sparks on dry grass. By the 10th night, her symbols had reached the neighboring village of Kallo, where a traveling merchant knelt in awe before a burning image of a girl walking through fire and leaving truth in her path. Nia watched it all unfold from the shadows with Ao beside her. She smiled, not with lips, but with the gleam in her eyes and the rising heat in the air around her. One evening, she lit a fire in a clearing and beckoned the villagers she trusted. With her hands, she summoned dancing flames and shaped them into the story of her life: birth, love, betrayal, silence. The flames moved like spirits, reenacting every moment in blazing detail. No words were needed. The watchers wept. When the flames shaped Baraka's face and then transformed it into a snake, no one flinched. They understood. And they were ready to choose. Nia wasn't just a girl anymore. She was a silent flame, one that refused to go out, no matter how many lies were thrown upon it. She had returned not to scream, not to beg, but to burn truth into the hearts of those who had once ignored her pain. And this time, they listened. The morning air in the village carried a strange tension, like thunderclouds waiting to split the sky. Outside the chief's compound, where the earth had long known only silent footsteps and whispered diplomacy, a blaze had erupted overnight. Not wild, not chaotic, but deliberate. A perfect ring of fire enclosed a carefully drawn symbol, a girl with no mouth, her heart aflame, her hand raised in protest. The symbol burned long after the fire should have faded, as if the earth itself refused to smother it. By midday, the village buzzed. Elders gathered. Children pointed and whispered. Mothers drew their scarves tighter and muttered prayers. The chief stood silently at his door, eyes heavy with the knowledge that neutrality was no longer an option. Ao emerged before the crowd, flanked by old Mara, young Tano, and Naya, whose small frame trembled but did not step back. He raised a hand. "We demand a tribunal," he declared, voice ringing louder than the chief's drum. "Before the ancestors and the living. We demand truth for Nia." The chief, once loyal to Baraka, shifted uneasily. "Truth has many faces, Ao. Then let the fire show which one is real." The chief's eyes flickered to the burning image still etched into the dirt. He sighed, deeply, and nodded. Drums were beaten. Horns were sounded. A tribunal was called, not in the chief's hut, but in the village square, where eyes from every corner of the land could witness what was to come. Baraka arrived cloaked in arrogance, his fine robes rippling in the wind, a smugness painted across his face like war paint. He sneered at the crowd. "Lies from children and spirits," he spat. "This is madness." Ao stepped forward. Then speak your truth. We'll speak ours. Baraka raised his chin. She was cursed from birth. Disobedient. Possessed. I saved this village from her poison. You cut out her tongue. Old Mara shouted, voice cracking. We saw the blood in your doorway. The blade you burned to hide it. Baraka laughed, sharp and bitter. You believe the mutterings of ghosts? Suddenly, the square fell silent. Because Nia had arrived. She did not walk. She moved like wind through dry grass, soundless, sure, commanding. Her cloak was woven from bark and ash, her arms marked with the fire symbols of her stories. A veil of flame floated behind her, flickering but not consuming. The crowd gasped. A child dropped to their knees. She stood before Baraka and raised her hands. The sky dimmed. From her palms, two fires erupted and circled each other like twin spirits. They grew tall, twisting, shaping into scenes. The first showed her as a little girl, singing beside her mother, joy in her eyes. Then her mother fell ill. Then Baraka standing at the door, closing it behind him. Then, violence. Then the blade. The crowd murmured. Then came the forest, the spirits, the fire. Each movement of her hands pulled more truth into flame, shaping memory into spectacle, testimony into living light. Her silence thundered in every gasp and every tear that rolled down villagers' cheeks. There was no room left for doubt. The fire did not lie. Baraka stepped back. The fire showed him standing over Nia, hands red. It showed him dragging her through the bush, leaving her broken by a tree. No, he screamed. This is sorcery. Illusion. But no one moved to stop the flames. And the elders, each seated on a carved stool of judgment, did not blink. One elder, a wrinkled man with trembling lips, whispered, I saw that wound once. The girl bled into the soil. I remember thinking no child should suffer that way. And yet I said nothing. Another elder clutched his chest. Her voice, she told us the truth before. And we ignored her because she was young. Because she was female. The chief stood. Baraka, he said, you are accused of mutilation, attempted murder, and lies that poison our people. Baraka's face twitched. You'd believe fire and phantoms over flesh and power? You'd disgrace me for a mute witch? The crowd surged forward, some screaming, others weeping. But in the chaos, Baraka turned and ran. He leapt over the tribunal drum, pushed through the children, and vanished into the bush. The crowd chased, but Nia raised her hand, stopping them. The fire spoke for her. He would face judgment, not in a court, but in the land where echoes never die. The elders stood solemnly. One knelt before Nia. We failed you. But today, we begin to see. Nia did not nod. She only turned, her fire forming the last symbol of the day, an open eye, burning bright. The people bowed. The trial had no verdict written in stone. But in the hearts of the villagers, justice had already begun. The forest was thick with shadows as Nia and Ao stepped beyond the village's edge, leaving behind the hush of justice half delivered. A drumbeat pulsed in the back of Nia's mind, slow, steady, ancient. Her bare feet barely stirred the leaves, but the fire within her churned. They were not alone. Behind them moved a quiet group of the brave and the uncertain, villagers who had once averted their gaze from pain, now following the girl who had once been silenced. The trees bent gently as if whispering her passage to the wind. Baraka had vanished deep into the wild, retreating to the forbidden lands where only the desperate dared go. The elders said the caves of the exiled were cursed, carved by traitors who had spoken against kings. But Nia knew now, silence and exile were not curses. They were weapons for the powerful. They followed the trail of snapped branches and burnt moss. Nia's fire glowed softly in her palms, a living compass. Every so often, it flickered toward the path with urgency. It knew where he was. As they walked, Ao glanced at her. Are you certain? He asked quietly. We've proven the truth. You don't need to face him again. Nia didn't respond with words, couldn't. But her fire answered, rising in a fierce twist before her chest, then cooling again. This was not about proving anything. It was about finishing what had begun long ago. At dusk, the caves appeared like a jagged wound in the mountain. Gnarled roots snaked down their mouth, and a smell of damp rot floated out. Nia stepped forward alone. The others waited. Inside, the walls whispered. Not with voices, but with pressure, memories pressing against her skin. Her fire cast long shadows on the stone, revealing faded paintings, ancestors with tongues of light, enemies bound in flame. Baraka was there, hunched by a small fire, his clothes torn, face wild. He rose the moment he saw her, panic flashing in his eyes before it twisted into rage. You think you've won? He snarled. You think stories and fire make you strong? He charged. A knife flashed from his belt, glinting in the firelight. But Nia didn't flinch. The flame burst from her chest, not in violence, but in instinct, shielding her, dancing up around her arms like serpents ready to strike. The knife met the fire and hissed. Baraka stumbled back, hand blistering. I raised you, he shouted. I took you in. And this is what you repay me with? Nia stepped forward. Her fire responded, not in fury, but clarity. Around them, the air thickened with heat. Baraka swung again, a wild, clumsy strike. But the flames caught his arm mid-air and coiled around him like vines. He screamed. The fire did not consume him whole. It danced across his skin, burning not flesh but pride. It peeled back every layer of his ego, every lie he had used to cover his shame. The cave walls lit up with Nia's fire-drawn truth, images of her mother's kindness, her own laughter as a child, the violence Baraka brought, the tongue he stole. Baraka dropped to the ground, howling, rolling in dirt that could not douse the flames licking at his shadow. The fire had no mercy for cowards, but it obeyed Nia. And Nia, eyes glowing, hands trembling, hesitated. Inside her, two paths warred. One voice whispered, end him. Burn him into memory. Another, quieter but deeper, said, justice is not vengeance. Pain must teach, not silence. She walked to him as he writhed. Her fire dimmed, shrinking to a thin circle around her feet. Baraka, blackened and moaning, looked up with terror. He tried to speak, but no sound came. Nia reached down and carved one final symbol into the cave floor, a circle broken on one side, mercy. Then she turned and left him behind. By the time she emerged from the cave, dawn had broken. The villagers stared at her, waiting. She nodded once. He's alive, Ao said softly, understanding. She nodded again. Should we bring him back for judgment? She shook her head. Let him stay in the darkness. Let him feel what exile truly meant. He had taken her voice. Now he would lose his own, feared, forgotten, powerless. As they walked back toward the village, Nia glanced once over her shoulder. The cave mouth seemed to seal itself with shadows. Somewhere in the darkness, Baraka wept, not for pain, but for the silence that would follow him forever. And Nia, though she spoke no words, felt the fire inside her calm. Not extinguished, but tempered. Not wild, but wise. Justice had not ended with fire. It had only begun. The village looked different now, not because the huts had changed or the trees stood any taller, but because the people had begun to see with new eyes. Smoke curled into the sky in soft spirals from cooking fires and torches, but these fires were not ordinary. Each flame that flickered from a lantern or hearth carried a symbol, a story, a tribute, a truth once buried. The villagers called it light tongue, a language born of pain and rebirth. When Nia stepped through the forest edge into the village's view, no one cheered. No one clapped or shouted her name. Instead, one by one, the villagers lit torches. A slow wave of fire rose, flickering down the paths, up the thatched roofs, and through the branches that crowned the central square. Not wild, not destructive, controlled, purposeful, beautiful. It was their way of speaking to her. A chorus of flames, each a different shape, the spiral of protection, the broken circle of mercy, the upward claw of truth. Nia paused in the square, the wind brushing against her. Her robes, woven by Wanja's hands, shimmered with ash-stitched threads. The fire within her glowed softly, not in anger now, but in resonance. Around her, children began to dance. Not in any dance the village had known, but one born in the forest of echoes. Bare feet pounded the earth in rhythmic patterns. Drums joined them, deep and low, then sharp and fast. Hands clapped cymbals into the air, and small fires rose to mimic them, as though the air itself now knew how to speak. One girl stepped forward, the smallest of them all, and raised her palm to Nia. A flicker of light sparked at her fingertips, a trembling flame forming the ancient mark of courage. She had never spoken a word in her life, mute from birth. But now she glowed with meaning. Nia knelt and pressed her forehead to the girl's, fire passing between them in a gentle pulse. No sound was needed. Every villager watched, breath held. They understood. From that day, Nia became more than a girl who had survived. She became a symbol. Her hut, rebuilt on the ashes of her mother's home, became a sanctuary for the voiceless. The wounded came from far villages, girls who had been beaten for speaking, boys who had been mocked into silence, elders whose wisdom had been ignored. She taught them the language of presence. In the mornings, she led fire-scribing lessons. Twigs burned against flat stones, carving glowing letters in ash. At noon, she sat with the drummers and taught rhythm stories, where truth was tapped into the earth in encoded beats. In the evenings, they walked the forests, listening to the voices of the wind and trees, honoring the spirits of the voiceless past. They called her Modem Jane, Widow Flame, not for being alone, but for the fire she carried in place of speech. One day, a trader from the northern hills wandered into the village. He had heard the tale of the girl with fire in her veins and wanted to see it for himself. He arrived skeptical, watching her without reverence. "Show me your power," he said arrogantly. "If you are the fire witch, I want to see fire leap when you command it." Nia did nothing at first. She simply stepped to the center of the square, took a single breath, and looked at the setting sun. Her hands rose slowly. And every flame in the village rose with them. Dozens of fires twisted upward in unison, tall, bright, and utterly silent. They danced around her like spirits called to prayer, flickering with the echo of unspoken words. Then, with a soft turn of her palms, they returned to stillness. The trader dropped to his knees. "Forgive me," he whispered. "This is no magic. This is truth." Words spread faster than wildfire. Villages began using the flame tongue in ceremonies. Even faraway clans sent messengers asking for Nia's teachings. Some brought gifts, carved drums, sacred ash stones, seeds from their forests. But Nia never left her village. Her duty was to those who had no voice, and many remained. She trained others to teach, others to lead, but always returned home. Her path had begun in that village, and it would anchor her forever. She saw Ao often, now the village's chief storyteller. Though he had a voice, he often chose silence when Nia was present, knowing it was the greatest respect he could offer. He had loved her once, and still did, in quiet ways. But they both knew Nia's heart belonged to something older, deeper, the fire that bound the truth. Wanja visited from the forest when the moon was full. She watched Nia's students with pride, always leaving a trail of ember leaves behind her. Once, she whispered into Nia's ear with a voice made of wind, "You have become the echo." One evening, the villagers gathered for what they called the Day of Return, marking the anniversary of Nia's walk back from death. No speeches were made. No songs were sung. Instead, each person lit a fire and carved a single symbol in ash, their truth. Some drew the outline of hands they had once raised in anger and now raised in healing. Some drew broken chains. Some drew eyes, open for the first time. And Nia walked through them, her steps lighting up the ground, the fire rising to greet her like old friends. She passed through every circle, nodded to every child, and paused beneath the old tree where her mother once sang lullabies. She placed her palm on the bark. A flame rose. It danced like laughter. The villagers said later they saw the fire take shape, lips curved in a smile, no mouth needed. A smile they would never forget. And though Nia never spoke again, the world around her never stopped speaking. In flames. In rhythm. In light. She had returned voiceless, but her truth had burned through the silence. And it would never be silenced again.